Hello, I am Brian McCall, the editor-in-chief of Catholic Family News. Today I'm in Chicago for the 2019 Catholic Family News Conference, the New Mass 50 Years of Problems. We've assembled an international team of speakers who have been addressing the conference on various aspects of the New Mass, which was introduced by Paul VI 50 years ago in 1969. One of our esteemed speakers is joining me now to talk about his experience with the Old and the New Mass. Louis Tofari, who is the founding publisher-editor of Romanitas Press at romanitas.com?
Romanitasspress.com.
Romanitasspress.com.
Yeah.
An incredible resource for matters liturgical and books, but also free resources right on the website. And I think, as I said to the conference earlier today, there's no one more knowledgeable that I know about the liturgy. He is literally a walking encyclopedia of knowledge. So happy to have you join us.
Thanks, Brian.
And,
it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank
again.
you. It's a welcome to, yes, and you have been to Catholic Family News before, so it's a pleasure
right.
to welcome you back. So tell us a little bit about growing up. Did you grow up Catholic? Did you grow up going
Yes.
to the New Mass? Yes?
So yes, I was born in '71, so of course the New Mass was full in swing. And I'm actually from the Chicago area. So I grew up in Elgin, South Elgin. The interesting thing was the church I grew up with St. Mary's Church in Elgin, was rather conservative growing up. It was a beautiful neo-Gothic church. They'd taken out altars and stuff. We were rather conservative when it came to liturgy, compared to what I saw in other places around me. So, did grow up Catholic in that way. And I realized at an early age, though, something was, I like to put it, something was not hunky-dory in the church. I didn't know exactly what it was.
Something was rotten in Chicago.
Yeah, we were in Rockford Diocese, though, too, so
Okay.
we were a little different. But in any case, so I have a great love of history. So I began, and I had a great love of the Mass. And so I began to, little by little, assemble and try to determine what was the problem. And I knew that there had been this Mass before Vatican II and this Mass after. I didn't really know what much was different, except that it was, that was obviously in Latin. I knew what the old altars in our church had looked like, and I'd often asked, why did they ever take those out? And I got lots of lame excuses that I never really bought, okay? And I just thought that was kind of sad that had happened. And my CCD was your pretty much typical CCD, which meant we really didn't learn much of anything. There was an incident that happened, I remembered. This was the year that they decided to shove communion in the hand down the throats of all American Catholics. And the United States Bishops' Conference had made this collective decision. And I found this out, of course, much later. I'm only, 7, 8 years old at this time. And I distinctly remember the Saturday we had to go up into our religion class. And we had these 3 ladies there who were teaching us to receive communion. And of course, we were being taught to receive in the hand. And I distinctly remember, oh, sorry, it was like this way. So you could do this, okay. I distinctly remember one of the children commenting, well, my grandmother says you should receive on the tongue. And the body language of these ladies was like, ugh.
Sirens went off.
Yeah. And, they said, and then very, very mockingly, they said, well, you can receive on the tongue, but it's better if you receive in the hand. Okay. It's interesting because as a young child, I have no idea why I remember that moment, because I actually do not remember the moment of my first communion. I just don't remember it. But I did remember that all those years. That stuck in my mind for some reason. And to fast forward to high school, I ended up finding out a little bit more here and there. I started playing 20 Questions with Father. I'd learned from my mother mainly as well, too. Because our CCD class was just, I knew that what I was learning wasn't like what my mother had learned when she grew up. And by the time I got to college, some interesting things happened. I call God put into my path stepping stones, which are people that I met along the way that led me to this journey to tradition. And interesting enough is one of the gentlemen who was attending this conference, it was his mother, who was my first big one.
Wow.
And I still don't even remember why or how, but she got the inkling that I was conservatively minded, invited us over for dinner, lent me several books, and interesting enough, a video that was done in Bayswater, London back in 1986 of the Solemn Mass. It was done by the Latin Mass Society of England and Wales. Fast forward almost 20 years, I got them to redo that video. I mean, to republic, make it available once again, because it had been out of publication for a while. So when I followed up to try to find it, they couldn't even find the original copy at first. Then they found it, and then they made it available on CD now.
Oh, great.
Just interesting how this all works out. But I took the stuff home, I absorbed it, and two of the books she lent me were extremely crucial, because I was already comparing the texts of the Mass and seeing how the prayers of the new Mass weren't as rich or full as in the traditional Mass, because my mother would put out her Mary Knoll Missal on the table for greater feast days.
Wow.
And I would read it, and I had the new Mass memorized.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, why did they change this?
Yeah.
This doesn't make any sense. And again, I'd get kind of lame excuse, well, people coming back from Vietnam couldn't, whatever, I don't know. Weird stuff, okay? And so these two books this lady lent to me, they discussed the theological changes that had been made. And I was already examining things from the standpoint of prayer or spirituality, because my great patron became St. Francis of Assisi, and I was reading about Father Solanus Casey, Padre Pio, and the way they're describing the Mass, the spirituality of the Mass, the supernatural reality of Mass, did not fit what I was, even in my conservative environment. I was like, what is going on? We have noise and chaos. We don't have this.
Right.
And so
so just at this point when you're reading these books, you've not actually ever been to a traditional Mass yet? You're just reading
I've never been to a
it.
traditional Mass yet or anything at all. And I'm realizing from the standpoint of prayer, something is lacking. Well, then these books fill in the theological gaps, and I'm like, oh, now this is starting to make sense. I watched this video. I memorized how to sing the asparagus off this video. And I was basically, another stepping stone happened. I ended up down at Marmion Abbey, which were a group of Benedictines, and they were somewhat conservative in how they did the divine office. It was, of course, in English, the Meinrad version of the Psalms. They had benediction, which was the first time I really ever attended benediction, and it was mostly in Latin. So suddenly I'm learning Tantum Ergo. I've never learned it before. I meet another gentleman, and after a while he begins to realize that I'm pretty conservative, and he begins to basically kind of talk to me a little bit more about these. He gives me a copy of the Verbum, which at that time was the publication of St. Thomas Aquinas Seminary of the SSPX up in Winona, and it's the 1993 priestly ordinations. And I'm just, wow, look at this. This is the way I would want to be ordained as a priest. Because at that point, I thought I had a vocation possibly to the priesthood, and I was considering this. And anyways, so he says, well, my wife only goes to traditional Mass, never laying on, and he was that same way. He was actually the organist there. Wow. And so one Sunday he says, take your car, bring it here, drop it off, don't let anybody know where I'm going to take you to traditional Mass. I'm like, okay. So we drive, we end up in Oak Park, which was where my grandmother had lived. So I knew Oak Park, and it was Our Lady Immaculate, which was of the SSPX, and the priest celebrating the Mass was Father Peter Scott, who happened to be the district superior at that time, who was also the pastor. So
you always go right to the top.
Yeah, I guess so. So, and I got to meet him right after Mass, introduce myself. I was also at this time the oldest altar server at St. Mary's Church in Elgin. So I was like, I wanted to learn how to serve the traditional Mass. A lot of other things happened after that. Long story. To make it short, is I ended up getting very interested in the sacred liturgy, especially in researching the rubrics, liturgical reform, all those things. And as of 2016, I basically took Romanitas Press full time. And so now my apostolate, or my work, is basically trying to get people to do the traditional liturgy as best as possible, make them more informed about it. So, I help out priests, I help the clergy, I help the servers, sacristans, laity, whatever, and of course giving conferences like this. So it's a great joy and pleasure to be able to do that.
Thank you. And we benefited at the conference today. Mr. Tofari gave a conference on Mediator Dei, which was the great encyclical of Pope Pius XII, which is the sort of the final word in a formal sense on the liturgy before the Second Vatican Council broke out. Obviously, there were things that happened, but the last great time the Church spoke about it, and really explained for us how Mediator Dei, if it had been obeyed, we wouldn't have the new Mass, how it really sets out in advance all of the, it's almost as if your mother says you have to walk to school, don't go down that one alley, it's really bad, you're going to get hurt.
That's
and
right.
what do? Walk right down that alley.
It's really interesting. It's paradoxical is the word I can use, because you take Mediator Dei and you compare it to the new Mass, and the new Mass is everything that Mediator Dei said you're not supposed to do with the liturgy.
Yes.
And it's funny, I'd known this for a while, but when you go and actually study that encyclical like I had to be able to give a decent conference, you're just like, holy cow, did these guys forget about this document? What happened there? Because, I mean, the condemnation against departing from true doctrine, suddenly you have the ecumenism and in the new Mass, and of course the diminishment of Catholic doctrine, the four ends, the necessity of living a holy life to get to heaven, the importation of antiquarianism for an ecumenical agenda, as well as just hankering after those novelties. The misuse or misappropriation, I should say, of the concept of active participation, and then basically using that to make the liturgy into this humanistic thing. Just on and on. I mean, it's all there, Mediator Dei, even to the point of them naming the error of trying to return back to the primitive altar table form, instead of what the altar went through a development and what it became.
Yes. Excellent, and this conference, along with all the others from the weekend, will be available through Catholic Family News, so you can hear more of this explanation that we heard here at the conference by ordering the conferences through our website. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for inspiring everyone. Remember, as you just heard, it's not an impediment if you don't say, well, I don't know anything about the liturgy, I don't know history, I don't know Latin. You can come, as both of us, we're hearing your story, but as both of us came from no knowledge of that, never been to a traditional Mass until I was in my 20s. Same thing, God doesn't make it so that it's hard to find. If you have the goodwill, you can learn anything you need to learn. And really an inspiring story on how you found your way to the traditional Mass. And thank God you did, because we wouldn't have such an incredible resource as you provide through Humanitas Press if you hadn't found it.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for listening. And remember to continue to check back to Catholic Family News website for the newest stories, blogs, and videos like this. Thank you.